So the game has massively changed in that time. Well, people are telling us that the game has changed. What do you think some of those changes are? And can you like maybe reflect on what those look like with the Six Nations? But also, is is that change at that level a reflection of changes that we're seeing at the lower levels as well? Because I think it's very easy, and I think this is one of the things that I've seen with rugby is that they keep changing the laws to manipulate what they're seeing in the professional and the international game and the elite game. Whether those laws are even necessary or or even necessary or improving the game at an amateur level is something that I'm not sure is even really considered. So I'd like your opinion on that. But yeah, what changes do you think there have been within the game?
Well, I think the shape of the game has changed. Some things have made the game change, just like things like the fact that the ball is tends to be a bit stickier than it was because the ball manufacturers are better. And if anyone goes to a training session and the ball is slippery, they know that the whole shape of the game changes. You just can't be that sort of
Well,
Fijian handling
they'll
style
just drop
ball.
it. They'll just drop it, and they'll switch it out for the
Yeah,
grippier ball. They're like, oh, what's this? If it's not
yeah,
perfectly pumped up as well, no, no, we're not going to use
yeah.
that one.
So I think that's changed. I think the expectations of what you can get at training sessions has changed. I think overall the general level of coaching is improved, and that's because there are more coaches who are more invested in coaching properly. Yeah, and there's a lot more access to information. Players going to training sessions are expecting a little bit more from the training sessions. The shape of the game, I don't changed enormously up to a certain level because the time you have to coach and train is not changed. You still at a grassroots level. If you can get two training sessions in a week and a game, then you've done well. At the pro game, I think in the last 4 or 5 years, it's probably not changed that much either because there's only so much time that is available to players and coaches. Yes, their analysis is probably improved. I think that the types of play that are available might have changed a bit, but I don't think it's changed enormously in the last 4 or 5 years. You're right that the laws have changed a few things around the edges of the game. I think one of the most
Hmm.
important thing is that there's a lot more emphasis on tackling lower. The game hasn't gone soft when players, if a player gets a shoulder to the head, then there needs to be a very serious look at why that happened, and if the players can tackle lower a lot more, then that's good. And we certainly saw some games in the Six Nations where there was no even thought to challenge whether it was a high tackle because there were no high
Hmm.
tackles. Yet, obviously, the big story was the red card in the start of the England versus Ireland game, and I don't think there's any doubt it was a red card.
Oh
Did
yeah, I
it
don't even
spoil
think
the game?
that is a story, right?
Yeah.
I think that shows what's happening. I mean, it's I think that's normal, and I think it's what we said about injuries as well. Like those when you're tackling that high, I think that is entirely preventable. You'll have
Yeah.
incidents where someone's falling and they hit their head, or a
Mm.
nasty collision with potentially two teammates when they come together and they make a tackle at the same time. You'll
Mm.
see that. But if you're just generally going in and tackling that high, yeah, that's technique.
Yeah. I agree, and I think the question came: did it spoil the game? And in a sense, it did because you want to see 15 versus 15 right from the start, and obviously Ireland and England came there to win. There was a lot on the game, and as soon as it's 14 versus 15, then not it wasn't necessarily a foregone conclusion, but at that level, it's probably going to be that way. So, as a spectacle, in one sense, it did spoil it. As in another way, it was a great game because England had to make some changes. They made those changes, and that was fascinating for that. But Ireland, in the end, had to adjust, and that was interesting. But I think a lot of people got very fussed about it, and it was 14 versus 15. That was what it was, and we just needed to accept that. And the thing is, of course, if someone is paying £100 plus for a ticket and the game immediately changes shape right from the start. It was like the Italy game, I can't remember the week before, when they were down to 13 because of the vagaries of the front row rules and that sort of thing. It's very tough. The thing is, of course, if that happens in a pickup game on a Saturday when Ding's thirds play old St Bernadette's
Hmm.
seconds, then it's different because the game won't be shaped so much by one player going off. Right at the top level, there's it's all on the margin, and eventually those players are going to run out of steam. So I think at the top level, it's interesting you say they're looking to gain entertainment. Our judgment of entertainment is very different. Some people think an entertaining game is when it is extremely physical. Other people think it when they pass the ball around a lot. Others when they think they sidestep. Some say when the players are physically dominating another player. I think the game has got you've got to approach each game and look for the things that you're going to enjoy. The difficulty is, of course, that the head coaches are all there to win games, and
Hmm.
three head coaches came away from the Six Nations thinking they'd had a bad Six Nations. One was delighted they won a game, that's the Italian coach,
Yeah.
and then the French and the Irish were probably quite pleased. So yeah, it's always the case, the knives are out for the ones who don't finish in the top two,
Yeah.
and it can be down. For instance, in England's case, a few small margins, and it could have gone the other way. But that's equally the case for Wales, and equally the case probably for Ireland. France could have quite easily lost against Wales. England could have quite easily lost against Wales, and then the knives would be even out. But it's just the. I think someone said it. One of the commentators said it. They would love to be able to go out next week and replay the game. The great
Yeah.
thing with grassroots rugby is you can often there's only a week until your next game. The Six Nations happens February, March, and then you've got all that time until another one. It's very frustrating for an international coach,
Yeah.
especially when you were so close and yet so far.
Definitely. I think we put it on a bit too sometimes. Well, I mean, it's rightly on a pedestal, the Six Nations, because it is once a year. You get one chance at each team, and then it's gone, and then that's it. And because it's only 5 games. I mean, for the last few years, you could even rule out the Italy game. The consequences of every single game, and therefore every single action of every game, means that it's that that it's so it seems so important. But then again, and this is something that I've thought about, as a coach, as far as like Eddie Jones's job. People will say, they'll England will gladly take that if this means, they'll take a couple, even coming fourth or fifth in a few Six Nations if it means they're going to win the World Cup. But that World Cup is even less of a snapshot. Like such a small, like you would have thought England did everything right in 2019, and they still, they'll reflect on that World Cup not as a negative because they didn't beat what was a one performance by South Africa that was just phenomenal, and potentially still not as good as the England performance that they put in against the All Blacks the week before.
Mm.
And every South African watching this is probably going to crucify me in the comments just for suggesting that. But I think it's true. Like Ireland have never got past the quarter final for so long, and I don't think there's any voodoo or anything crazy. It's just it is really hard, and there's only one team in the world every 4 years that can win the World Cup, and for every one team that is a winner, there are what 19 losers, and so
Well, I think that I quite like the
sport is
golf.
strange with that.
Yeah, yeah, I quite like the golf idea that the best way to enter a golf tournament is to say there's the field of 80, let us say, one person's going to win. So if I judge myself on whether I win or not, then I'm generally going to be unhappy. And the Six Nations just should be saying, right, it's a fantastic chance to test yourself, and
Hmm.
maybe we should get rid of the bonus points in the table and just take away some of the edge in winning it. Is because it lessens, I think, the spectacle. I think, I mean, like the previous Lions tour was ridiculous. It
Yeah,
became, it's just, I
it
don't
turned
think
me
they'll
off.
ever
I
recap the,
thought I
yeah.
thought it that might be the death of the Lions. That tour. I
Well,
don't know.
I personally, I think it died in after 1997. I expect I'll be hammered. From was it 1997? The fantastic
Yeah.
tour, obviously a great spirit, some great videos, and from then on, it's just become more and more commercial. And the commentators become part of that because they say, his first Lions thing, da 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 da. Da. Of course, it'd be amazing to put on the Lions shirt, but it becomes a much bigger thing than it should be. It is an honor, but should be more about the sport and the joy of the sport and the joy of movement than all in. We've got to win this.
Hmm.
And I mean, Warren Gatland was just wanted to win. He produced teams that were successful. I didn't enjoy the way that the Lions played generally. Obviously, I was pleased when they did they did win games, but it wasn't played. They didn't play in a particularly
Inspiring.
uh, inspiring way. And I mean, when they won in Australia, they won it by winning scrum penalties overall.
Hmm.
And then eventually the Australians were punch drunk and then they started to play. Well, I would quite like put together side just to go out and play some rugby, try some things, do not necessarily play like the Barbarians. And I think the Barbarians has become like that way. They've got to play in a certain way. They've got to almost be silly and that sort of thing. And I just I just think it's just we put too much emphasis on a perceived value and just don't just go and play the game for the sake of playing the game. And when you turn out and you run onto the pitch, as I said, after about 3 or 4 minutes, your lungs are burning. You don't think you're going to last another 80 minutes. You do. There's something inside you which does that. And that's the joy of it. And I think you said very early on when we're talking, are we trying to make this thing a spectacle? And let's forget making it spectacle. Let's just enjoy it because players are trying their hardest. They're enjoying what they're doing to a certain extent. They're enjoying what they're doing. They're trying to impose their own skill on the game, and the coaches help and support that. Let's enjoy it for that, as opposed to we want them to see them do this number of this type of pass or do this sort of spectacular stuff.
Yeah.
Sometimes games with no tries can be absolutely thrilling
Hmm.
because its great attack is then thwarted at the last moment by great defense. So why not? And also sometimes games in the rain. I mean, a Six Nations game can just change on the weather.
Hmm.
Uh, so yeah, I'm not quite sure where I was quite going
Any
with that
game.
last point. Yeah, but I just think overall we've got to avoid it's creating a monster really, and recognizing what the game should be. It's like should we have an all singing and all dancing spectacle when you go to a match, or should you go for just a match? And I think the answer is actually it's a match day experience. And the match day experience, so this is another rabbit hole, I think is spoilt by the fact that some people do not sit and watch a game for 80 minutes. They were up
Hmm.
and down the whole time. And I mean, I haven't been to an international since 2012. England versus New Zealand, I don't think I could ever top that as an experience because I just knew that I'm just going to be frustrated by people getting up and down the whole time to go and get another beer. And
Hmm.
uh, maybe the day when you can have a seat and the beer pops up in front of you, that would
That'd
be
solve everything.
the ultimate.
That'd be perfect. Because
Yeah,
then, yeah, you're right. Because it is part of that match day experience. I mean, it's the match, it's watching the game, but then there is a good social aspect to it as well. I can imagine. I think what we've got to understand is, particularly as players, is how people want to appreciate the game. You touched on it a little bit as far as if every player just accepts their role and sort of does what just tries their best to get the enjoyment out of it. I think sometimes rugby, especially in England, it's quite a long season. But in general, if you're in the midst of a rugby season, or even just starting out a pre-season, it seems quite daunting. It can be seen as a bit of a grind. But I think if you can flip that on its head and you take enjoyment from the fact that you're being able to participate in this amazing sport that you can solve in so many different ways, it can help. I'd like to ask you, because you mostly work with coaches, when you do coach with players, like what do you think players can do as they approach individual training sessions? And we see it a bit more as to how professionals approach it, but amateurs can take some of that away as well. Like, you know, even if they're just training twice a week or whatever, there's a lot of things that I think they can take away, and how that they can approach a rugby training session in order to, not just to, you know, improve, but like get the most enjoyment, and why those two things probably aren't even very mutually exclusive at all.
Yeah, I mean, I know you sent the question to me before we came online, and so it was a quite interesting one to reflect on. I think the first thing is that players have got to recognise that they've got to put themselves forward. They've got to create the energy themselves just as much as they expect the coach to create the energy. They can't just go there and expect to be entertained and automatically motivated. I'm going there to make the most out of the session. So if an exercise is being run, I want to put myself at the front as much as I can. I don't want to sit and wait for things to happen to me. I think the other thing is to just to know that you've got to go through some sort of pain. It's going to be hard. And one of the things I'm quite interested in at the moment is the pain of reading and writing. I just came across it in a book the other day, but I've also been thinking about it in trying to help my players think more deeply about what they're doing. If you have to sit down and read a book, that is not a straightforward thing. It doesn't come easy. We're much happier to sit and listen or watch some television or something like that. So you read a book and you get a lot more out of reading a book when you take the time, sit down and maybe make some notes, write about it. And if someone says to you, can you explain what's going on? Sit down and try and write it. Now, not everyone is going to be Shakespeare or J.K. Rowling and be able to just write naturally, but that is effort. And if you want to really get something out of a training session, be prepared to go and sweat, be prepared to also ache, and be prepared to have to think deeply about what you're doing because then you're going to get a lot more out of it.
Mm.
If you, yeah, you naturally, there'll be laughs. You can't get a bunch of rugby players in one place and there not to be some laughs. It's almost impossible. I can't think of an occasion where I haven't been in a training session and there's been no laughs.
Yeah,
There's been
if you're in
sometimes
that
fewer
team,
laughs.
leave. That's never gonna, like, that's, yeah. I
Yeah,
can't think of that with habit. Like everyone, and that's why everyone thinks that their team's like the best team. Like it's a
yeah,
good thing. Yeah, definitely.
yeah. But I think the other thing that you have to understand is that you're not going to agree with everyone. There are going
Hmm.
to be people in that team who are not your type of person. Now, you've got to be prepared to accept their point of view. You don't have to believe in it, and you will. And sometimes the coach is going to say stuff that's not going to be what you like, and sometimes the coach is going to drop you. And
Hmm.
you cannot, and you have to be resilient about it. If they're bullying you, that's different. But you've got to be able to say, sometimes someone's going to say, you're wrong. You haven't made enough effort. That you're not getting that right. And if you are good enough, strong enough, you will be able to bounce back and get on. And that's one of the reasons why you should play sport because it allows you to be in a place where if you make a mistake, it doesn't matter as much as making a mistake in maybe other walks of life because there's always next week.
That is
And if
huge.
the worst comes, yeah,
You're
it
like, sorry,
is.
I have to cut in there because that is like the biggest thing I always try and say now with people at training is I reflect on my years, especially like early 20s, late teens, and I was, you know, trying to really try eventually make rugby my career and do all of that stuff. And I remember I was a back row, so that's always in any club you go to ever. Back row is always the most competitive position,
Mm,
and so I was essentially, probably on reflection, like petrified of making mistakes because I knew if I made a few mistakes, I wouldn't start the following weekend, or even worse, I'd be dropped to the 18. Like, and that like that, my ego hated that idea. So therefore, I would just do everything I could that I knew I was already good at. Mostly, you know, I wouldn't put myself out there. I wouldn't try and take on new roles. I wouldn't even evolve my game. And when I reflect on that, like, what's the purpose of training? It's training, it's practice. You're like, that's, if you're going to make mistakes, like, make them there, because that's the only way. Like, you're never gonna just go, okay, now I'm gonna try and develop a 30 meter left-handed spin pass, and you're never going to do it the first time. You're not even going to do it the first 100 times. You've got to get those reps in, and you're going to fail with those reps. And you said you've got the skill acquisition science guys talking about it. And I know that there's some people that have the thought of, it doesn't even matter how many of those reps are failure, as long as you just keep getting repetition in with the idea of whatever it is you're trying to achieve. So we say this 30-meter spin pass, it doesn't actually, the result of what your each repetition isn't important. It's just the intention. As long as you keep doing it, you're going to build up that volume to get better. And I think so many players and athletes, like, they're sort of don't want to do that. They want to train as if it's a match, or train as if, and even in the gym as well, like, they're afraid to lift slightly lighter weights than they did before, because what? Like, there's no reason. Like, you're not going to get weaker because you're lifting lighter weights. You might actually get stronger because you've adjusted your technique and you're lifting better. It's funny that we're so afraid to make mistakes and take back steps, but it's also completely understandable. But I think the more we can bring awareness to that, like, the better people's training experience and the results of those training experiences can be.
And also to add to that is that training is not just about the game. Training is about lots of other things. That if you play rugby just to play the game, then you're probably joining for the wrong reasons. And yeah, it is about meeting people, enjoying other people's company, but also there's plenty of life lessons in there. I'm not going to go into you don't play rugby for life lessons, but there are life lessons in there. So I would say that, yeah, from a player's point of view, you've got to bring some energy, you've got to be prepared to make some mistakes, and you've also got to be prepared to go through a bit of pain. And if that's physical and mental pain, that's fine. I mean, pain in a positive way, of course, not in a negative way.